All right, today we're tackling a question that has tied philosophers and theologians in knots for, well, centuries. If God is all-powerful, why in the world does he allow evil to exist? We're going to dive into one of the most unflinching and, yeah, controversial answers out there from the mind of John Calvin.
I mean, we've all asked this, right, in some way or another. If God is really in control of everything, does that control somehow extend to the absolute worst parts of life? Well, John Calvin didn't shy away from this. He ran straight at the idea that God's sovereignty has to, in some way, include evil itself.
So, to really get a grip on his logic, we're going to follow his argument in 4 key steps. We'll start with the puzzle itself, then look at why he said God does way more than just permit evil. From there, we'll get into the really thorny issue of human guilt, and finally, we'll see how Calvin tries to resolve what looks like a massive contradiction in God's will.
Okay, first up, the sovereignty puzzle. And this is a profound tension, isn't it? On one hand, you have this belief in a God who meticulously governs the entire universe, and on the other, you have the raw, unavoidable, in-your-face reality of evil. How can both of those things possibly be true at the same time?
You know, the answer you usually hear is that God doesn't cause evil, he just permits it. This kind of paints a picture of a passive God, one who just stands back and lets things unfold. But for Calvin, this wasn't just a weak argument. He believed it totally contradicted the picture of a deeply active and involved God you see in the Bible.
And that leads us right into the core of Calvin's whole argument, his case for an active divine will. He just was not satisfied with this idea of bare permission, where God basically just steps aside and lets things happen.
In Calvin's view, God isn't some distant observer sitting up in a watchtower just waiting to see what happens by chance. No. He is the true arbiter who doesn't just watch events, but actively decrees and directs them for his own purpose. This is a huge shift from a passive God to a profoundly, and I mean profoundly, active one.
A key example for Calvin was the story of Job. So after Job gets attacked by raiders, which is a clear act of human evil, Job doesn't blame them. He attributes his loss directly to God, saying, "The Lord has taken away." For Calvin, this was Exhibit A, that even the wicked acts of people are ultimately instruments of a higher will.
But maybe the most powerful example Calvin uses is the crucifixion. I mean, the actions of the people who killed Jesus were undeniably wicked, and yet the apostles preached that this event, arguably the most evil act in all of history, was not some accident. It happened according to God's definite plan to bring about redemption. And for Calvin, you just see this pattern over and over again in Scripture. Satan has to show up before God to get his marching orders. God sends a lying spirit to deceive a king. Entire evil empires are called the rod of his anger. The conclusion seemed inescapable. God actively uses even evil agents to accomplish his will.
Okay, so this is where things get really tough. This brings us to the third and most difficult part of the argument, the great objection. If God is directing all of this, how can any person be blamed for what they do?
I mean, that's the logical question, right? If people are just puppets carrying out some divine script, where's their responsibility? Doesn't this whole theory make God the true author of sin and humans totally innocent? Calvin knew he had to answer this head-on.
And Calvin's answer hangs on this really crucial distinction, the difference between God's will and his precept. Think of it this way. The will is God's hidden, secret plan, what actually happens in the world. The precept is his revealed public law, what we ought to do, like do not murder. Humans make a conscious choice to break the precept, even while they're unknowingly fulfilling the hidden will.
And this chart here just lays it out perfectly. In the exact same act, the motives can be completely different. Let's go back to the crucifixion. God's motive was righteous, to bring about redemption for all humanity. But the motive of the men who actually carried it out? That was evil. Jealousy, hatred, a desire to destroy an innocent man. Same act, 2 totally different intentions.
To really nail this down, Calvin pulls out this amazing quote from the theologian Augustine. It's not the act itself, but the motive behind it, the cause of the doing, that determines if it's right or wrong. God's motive is always just. Man's motive? Well, it's often sinful, and that's where his guilt comes from. It's how you can have 2 different actors responsible for a very same event. All right, that brings us to our last big question here, and we have to resolve one final contradiction. Does this whole thing mean that God has 2 conflicting wills, one that's secret and one that's public? And Calvin's answer is a hard no. God's will is not divided, it's not at war with itself, it is one, simple, and completely unified. The apparent contradiction, he argues, isn't in God at all, It's in us. It's a problem of our own limited human perspective. He explains it like this. Just like God's wisdom is described as manifold, kind of like having many different facets, so is the way His will works. We just can't see the whole picture at once. Our minds are simply too small to grasp how a single perfect will can operate in ways that look so contradictory to us down here.
So this is it. This brings us to the ultimate, mind-bending paradox of Calvin's doctrine. In his theology, nothing happens without God's will, not even the very things that are done against His revealed will. He willingly decrees that actions He forbids will happen, using the evil motives of men to bring about His own perfectly righteous goals.
In the end, Calvin's entire argument pushes us right to the very edge of our own understanding. It demands a kind of trust in a plan that seems completely paradoxical from our limited point of view. And look, whether you agree with his theology or not, it leaves all of us with a pretty profound question. What does it truly mean to live within a reality that is just far too complex for us to ever fully grasp?